The hum of travelers filled the air as the afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the bustling airport terminal. People moved briskly, their faces set with purpose, dragging suitcases or balancing coffee cups. Amid the chaos of departures and arrivals, a lone figure stood out, a boxer with a sleek coat and piercing eyes. The dog sat near the sliding glass doors, his head tilted as he watched people pass by. His posture was calm but alert, as though waiting for someone who had yet to return. The boxer had been there for hours, unnoticed by most. Travelers glanced his way occasionally, but dismissed him as someone's pet temporarily left behind. He wasn't tied to anything, nor did he wear a collar. His large, muscular frame radiated quiet strength, but his eyes betrayed a sense of confusion and unease. Every time the doors slid open, he stood, tail wagging faintly, only to sit back down when no familiar face appeared. Not far from the doors, a retired teacher named Eleanor sat on a bench. She was in her late 60s, her face lined with the marks of a life filled with both joy and sorrow. Eleanor was waiting for her niece's flight to arrive, knitting quietly to pass the time. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind wandered, observing the world around her. The dog caught her eye almost immediately. There was something different about him, something that tugged at her heart. Eleanor had always had a soft spot for animals, particularly dogs. She'd had 3 over the years, each one leaving a lasting imprint on her life. Now, living alone in her modest house, she often felt the absence of a loyal companion. Watching the boxer, she felt an inexplicable connection. She put her knitting aside and walked slowly toward the dog, her cane tapping softly against the tiled floor. As she approached, the dog turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, neither moved. Then, cautiously, Eleanor extended her hand. "Hello there," she said softly. "Where's your owner?" The dog sniffed her hand, his tail wagging just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Eleanor crouched down with difficulty, her knees protesting the motion. "You don't have a collar," she murmured, her voice filled with concern. "Are you lost?" Over the next hour, Eleanor stayed near the dog, occasionally offering him water from a bottle and scraps of food from her bag. She watched as countless travelers passed by, many too consumed by their own schedules to notice the boxer. A few smiled at Eleanor and the dog but kept walking, their interest fleeting. It wasn't until a maintenance worker approached that Eleanor learned the truth. "He's been here since this morning," the man said, shaking his head. "Looks like someone dropped him off and left. Security said there's no microchip or tag." Eleanor's heart sank. She glanced at the dog, who now lay curled at her feet, his large head resting on his paws. The thought of someone abandoning such a noble creature in a place as overwhelming as an airport filled her with both sadness and anger. "Poor thing," she said quietly. "He doesn't understand what's happened." As the hours passed, Eleanor grew increasingly attached to the boxer. Despite his size and intimidating appearance, he had a gentle demeanor, leaning into her touch when she stroked his head. The bond they formed in such a short time surprised even Eleanor, but she couldn't deny it. This dog, left behind and alone, needed someone, and perhaps she needed him just as much. When her niece's flight finally arrived, Eleanor explained the situation. The young woman listened with wide eyes, glancing between her aunt and the dog. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Eleanor sighed, looking down at the boxer. "I can't just leave him here." The decision was clear, though daunting. Eleanor hadn't cared for a dog in years, and the thought of bringing such a large animal into her quiet home was overwhelming. But as she looked into the boxer's trusting eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. With her niece's help, Eleanor spoke to airport security and arranged to take the dog home. It was a process filled with paperwork and questions, but eventually the three of them walked out into the cool evening air together. The boxer trotted beside Eleanor, his tail wagging slightly, as if sensing that he was no longer alone. The ride home was quiet, but filled with a sense of possibility. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat as her niece, Clara, drove through the dimly lit streets. The boxer lay on a blanket in the back seat, his head resting on his paws. Every now and then, he would glance out the window or at Eleanor as though trying to make sense of his new surroundings. When they arrived at Eleanor's small cottage on the edge of town, the dog hesitated at the door, his large frame casting a shadow in the porch light. Eleanor knelt down, her knees creaking with the effort, and extended a hand toward him. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "This is your home now." After a moment, the boxer stepped inside, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, taking in the scents of lavender and old wood that filled the cozy space. Eleanor watched him with a mix of concern and hope, wondering how long it would take for him to settle in. Eleanor decided to call him Bruno. The name came to her in a flash, and it seemed to fit his strong yet gentle demeanor. "What do you think of that?" she asked, stroking his head. Bruno wagged his tail slightly as if approving her choice. The first night was a mixture of restlessness and small victories. Bruno paced the living room, circling the rug several times before finally curling up near the fireplace. Eleanor laid a soft blanket there for him, and though he didn't immediately use it, he seemed to appreciate the gesture. She sat in her armchair, watching him with quiet affection. "Whoever left you didn't know what they were losing," she murmured. "But you're safe now." Bruno let out a low sigh, his body relaxing as sleep finally claimed him. Eleanor stayed awake a little longer, her heart heavy with thoughts of what he must have endured. But for the first time in a long while, she also felt a sense of purpose, a spark of life she hadn't realized she was missing. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of Bruno padding softly around the house. She found him sitting by the window, his ears perked as he watched the world outside. He turned to look at her, his eyes bright and expectant. "Well, good morning to you," Eleanor said, smiling as she reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Hungry?" She prepared a simple breakfast for him, following advice she'd found online about feeding large dogs. Bruno ate eagerly, his tail wagging with each bite. Watching him, Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "We'll have to take you to the vet soon," she said. "Make sure you're healthy." That afternoon, Eleanor and Bruno visited the local veterinarian. The clinic was warm and welcoming, with cheerful staff who marveled at Bruno's size and calm demeanor. Dr. Patel, a kind woman with a soothing voice, conducted a thorough examination. "He's in surprisingly good shape," Dr. Patel said, running her hands gently over Bruno's coat. "A bit underweight, but nothing a good diet won't fix. He seems to be healthy otherwise." Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That's a relief," she said. "I was so worried about him." Dr. Patel smiled. "You've done a wonderful thing taking him in. He's lucky to have you." As they left the clinic, Bruno walked confidently beside Eleanor, his head held high. It was as if he knew he had found a place where he belonged. Over the next few days, Bruno began to settle into his new home. He followed Eleanor from room to room, his large frame surprisingly graceful in the small cottage. He claimed a spot by the fireplace as his own, often lying there with his head resting on his paws, watching Eleanor as she read or knitted. Eleanor, in turn, found herself talking to him more and more, sharing stories about her life and her late husband, who had also loved dogs. "He would have adored you," she said one evening, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Bruno looked up at her, his eyes filled with understanding. Their bond grew with each passing day, a quiet companionship that brought warmth to Eleanor's once lonely home. Bruno's presence was a reminder of resilience and the power of second chances, and Eleanor couldn't imagine her life without him. Eleanor and Bruno's story continued to resonate far beyond their small town. The article about their journey spread quickly, reaching animal lovers across the region. Letters poured in, many from people who had experienced similar losses or had rescued animals in need. Each letter carried a heartfelt message, and Eleanor made it a habit to read them aloud to Bruno during their quiet evenings by the fireplace. One letter, in particular, stood out. It came from a young girl named Sophie, who had recently convinced her parents to adopt a rescue dog. "Your story made me realize how important it is to give animals like Bruno a second chance," Sophie wrote. "Our dog was scared at first, but now he's my best friend. Thank you for inspiring me." Eleanor's eyes misted as she finished reading. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box where she kept other mementos of Bruno's impact. "You're not just changing my life, Bruno," she said, stroking his head. "You're changing theirs too." Bruno let out a soft huff, as if acknowledging her words, his expressive eyes filled with trust and contentment. The community began organizing events inspired by Eleanor and Bruno's bond. A local shelter hosted an adoption fair, naming it Bruno's Second Chances. Eleanor was invited as a guest of honor, and she brought Bruno along to meet the attendees. The large boxer became the star of the event, his calm demeanor and friendly nature drawing people in. Children flocked to him, giggling as he licked their hands or let them pet his velvety ears. Adults approached Eleanor with gratitude, sharing their own stories of rescue and renewal. "You've shown us what love can do," one woman said, her hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder. "Thank you for reminding us that it's never too late to make a difference." By the end of the day, dozens of animals had found homes, their new families inspired by Bruno's journey. As Eleanor and Bruno walked home, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of fulfillment. "Look at what you've done," she said, smiling down at him. "You've started something wonderful." At home, their life together continued to flourish. Bruno, once abandoned and unsure of his place in the world, had become the center of Eleanor's universe. His presence brought structure to her days and warmth to her nights. They shared quiet mornings in the garden, where Bruno often chased butterflies while Eleanor tended to her flowers. Evenings were spent by the fire, with Eleanor knitting as Bruno rested beside her, his steady breathing a soothing rhythm in the cozy room. The bond between them was unshakable, built on trust and an unspoken understanding. Bruno seemed to sense Eleanor's emotions, offering comfort when she felt down and celebrating her joys with boundless enthusiasm. In turn, Eleanor gave him the stability and love he had been denied for so long. One crisp autumn morning, Clara visited Eleanor to share exciting news. "The article about Bruno has been nominated for an award," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "It's brought so much attention to rescue animals. People are still talking about it." Eleanor was humbled by the news. "I never expected any of this," she said. "I just did what I felt was right." "And that's why it's so powerful," Clara replied. "You and Bruno have shown people what kindness can do." The award ceremony was a modest affair, but it brought the community together once more. As Eleanor accepted the recognition on behalf of Bruno, she spoke from the heart. "Bruno didn't just find me that day at the airport," she said. "He gave me a second chance, too. Together, we've built something beautiful, a reminder that love has no bounds." The audience erupted into applause, and Bruno, sensing the excitement, wagged his tail enthusiastically. Eleanor glanced down at him, her heart full. "Thank you, Bruno," she whispered, "for everything." As the months turned into years, Bruno became more than just Eleanor's companion. He became a symbol of hope and second chances. His story, once a private journey of resilience, had touched the hearts of people far beyond their small town. Families who had read about him began to share their own stories of adoption and rescue, inspired by the unwavering bond between the boxer and the woman who had given him a new life. Eleanor often reflected on how much Bruno had changed her world. Before him, her days had been quiet, her home filled with solitude. Now, laughter and love filled every corner of her life. "You've brought so much joy to me," she often told Bruno, her voice soft as she scratched behind his ears. "I didn't realize how much I needed you until you came." Bruno, though older now, was as devoted as ever. He followed Eleanor wherever she went, his loyalty unwavering. Together, they created a life rich with simple pleasures. Long walks in the crisp morning air, cozy nights by the fire, and afternoons spent in the garden, where Bruno loved to watch the butterflies flit between the flowers. One spring day, Eleanor received a surprise visit from Sophie, the young girl who had written her a letter after adopting her own rescue dog. Now, a teenager, Sophie brought her dog, Max, to meet Bruno. The two dogs greeted each other with wagging tails, sniffing curiously before settling into a playful rhythm. "I wanted to thank you in person," Sophie said, her eyes bright. "Max has changed my life, and it's all because of your story. It made me believe I could make a difference." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride. "You've done something wonderful, Sophie," she said, "and Max is lucky to have you." As they talked, Eleanor realized how much Bruno's journey had impacted others. What had begun as an act of kindness on a chaotic day at the airport had grown into a ripple of compassion that reached far beyond what she could have imagined. As time passed, Eleanor and Bruno's bond only deepened. Though Bruno's pace slowed and his muzzle began to gray, his spirit remained as strong as ever. Eleanor adjusted her routines to accommodate his needs, ensuring he was comfortable and cared for. "We're in this together," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. "Always." The community continued to celebrate Bruno's legacy, organizing annual adoption events in his honor. Each year, Eleanor and Bruno were invited as special guests, their story serving as a reminder of the transformative power of love and kindness. Eleanor often spoke at these events, her words heartfelt and humble. "Bruno taught me that it's never too late for a second chance," she would say, "and that love, true, unconditional love, can heal even the deepest wounds." One crisp winter evening, as snow gently fell outside, Eleanor sat by the window with Bruno at her feet. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room. She gazed at the snowy landscape, her heart full of gratitude for the journey they had shared. "You've given me more than I ever expected, Bruno," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You've shown me that life can be beautiful, even after loss." Bruno looked up at her, his eyes filled with the trust and love that had defined their bond. His tail wagged slowly, his contentment palpable. As Eleanor leaned down to stroke his head, she felt a profound sense of peace. Their journey together had been unexpected, challenging, and deeply rewarding. Bruno had not only found a home, he had created one, filling it with joy, purpose, and a legacy that would continue to inspire for years to come. If this story of resilience, love, and the power of second chances touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread the message that every life deserves a chance at love and happiness.